In 1951, the University of Alberta's first library was completed. It was a lavish monument to Alberta's new oil wealth. The exterior of the building is faced with fossil-rich Tyndallstone from Manitoba. The reference reading room has a magnificent wrought iron chandelier and a mural depicting the history of Alberta. There was a grouping of leather sofas and chairs in front of the checkout desk. In the basement, there was a smoking room with paneling and furniture of knotty pine. Other areas featured marble imported from Italy and bronze fire doors. Prior to the Rutherford, there was no real library on campus. Books were in all sorts of locations. The Arts Library was a basement storage area in the Arts Building. Some books were stored on shelves in professors' offices, others just wherever they could be conveniently kept. I had been hired to work in the library that summer, and my first assignment was to work with 3 temporary student workers to receive books transported from all over the campus and to put them in order on the shelves they were designed for in this magnificent new building. One of my co-workers was Christian. I had seen Christian before. There were only about 3,000 students on campus. However, we had never met. Christian was technically the only Indian on campus and the first Indian ever to attend U of A. There was also a Trinidadian student whose ancestors had come from the Indian subcontinent. I didn't notice that the 2 of them were brown. At least I never thought about it. After all, the most liked girl in the student body was Vi King, the vice president of the Students' Union, a black law student from Amber Valley. Christian was also working at the CHFA transmitter that summer. He would work a 24-hour shift, turning the transmitter on at 4 a.m. and off at midnight. Then he had 2 days off. For the other 2 days, he worked at the Rutherford. So that's how we met, emptying boxes of books and reading shelves. Once the job was completed and the library was in pristine order, his part was finished, but we began to date. After we were married, he would tease me and say, well, I was his boss when we met, and I just hung on to that role. I was living in the women's residence, Pembina Hall, and Christian was living one residence over in Assiniboia Hall. He was a bit of an enigma to some of the girls. They would ask me, who was that Egyptian you were out with last night? Or who was that South American? One day I was called into the Dean of Women's office. She said that someone in Windsor Park had phoned the university to complain about me. Christian and I had walked past someone's picture window and, horror of horrors, we were holding hands. This person demanded that the university stop this unseemly behavior. The dean told me she had known my family for a long time, and maybe I should cool it a bit. Christian was called into the provost's office. The provost looked at him sternly and said, "Don't you know it's against the law to hold hands with a white girl?" Christian lost his temper and replied, "You have no right to tell me what I can or cannot do." "Get off your high horse," the provost replied, and the interview ended. Christian's family had lived in the part of India that became Pakistan after Britain partitioned the country in 1947. Partition led to widespread violence and looting. Several million people were murdered. Christian and his dad and 2 brothers spent a week in a refugee camp prior to being able to get to India. The camp was attacked by mobs several times while they were there. It had always been planned that he would go abroad to study, but the family had lost everything in the exodus to India. Christian's father, a university professor, cashed in his pension so that Christian would have money to continue his education. However, Christian had no records The college he attended in Pakistan was not prepared to provide transcripts or anything else to persons in India. No American university would accept him without transcripts. And in Canada, only the University of Saskatchewan would accept him. They gave him a year of probation to show that he had the background he claimed. After 2 years in Saskatchewan, he heard about the oil boom in Alberta and transferred to U of A. There was no racism among the students on campus, but when it appeared we might marry, the faculty began to voice objections. We were told that we would never be accepted in Canadian society, that our children would encounter discrimination and harassment, and that Christian would have trouble getting employment. I was told that Indians didn't respect their wives and that Indian women had no rights. My parents also objected strongly to our marriage. My father claimed it wasn't racism, but the fact that Christian wasn't a Christian. A couple of women in Kamra told my mother that if I married Christian, they would never speak to her again. In 1953, the Archbishop of the Anglican Church in Canada attended an Anglican Synod meeting in India. As he had previously been the Bishop of Edmonton, my father knew him and asked him if he would go and see Christian's parents. He did, and they met him and treated him with traditional respect. Among the three of them, they agreed that the marriage would never take place. My mother-in-law-to-be, however, must have suspected that that might not be the end of it. She gave the Archbishop 2 very beautiful gold-embroidered saris and an ivory bracelet to give to Christian so that he could present them to me as engagement presents from his parents. At that time, returning travelers could only claim $50 worth of goods acquired abroad. I have always suspected that the good Archbishop may have smuggled in my saris. No Anglican minister in Edmonton or Kamra would agree to perform our marriage ceremony. My brother-in-law, a United Church minister, also refused because of my parents' attitude. A very nice United Church cleric did agree. When I told him my father would not give me away, he said I should consider that I was not an object or a subhuman to be given away. I was an independent human being. I liked that. I did not know that under Canadian law, I was actually giving up a lot of rights just by becoming a married woman. The lack of those rights never affected me, but over the years, I learned how difficult it was for some women. We were married on a sunny May day in St. Stephen's College Chapel. My parents came to the wedding and brought a wedding cake and sandwiches for the reception. They had been told by their minister that it was up to them to oppose the marriage till it happened. If it happened, it was their responsibility to support us. My father told me that it would probably be all over in 2 years and I could come home. When Christian passed away with COVID, we had been married for 67 years. My mother arrived in Edmonton late in 1905 when she was not quite 3 years old. The population at the time was just over 8,000. According to the Edmonton Bulletin, my grandfather, Paul Castor, opened a photography studio on Jasper Avenue in March of 1906. He concentrated on portraits, unlike Ernest Brown, who took scenic pictures as well as pictures of Indigenous people. My mother's earliest memory is from when she was 3. My grandfather had taken her shopping on Jasper Avenue. They passed a cigar shop which had a wooden effigy of an Indian outside the door. She looked up at it and screamed in terror. In 1907, Paul Castor built his house on the western edge of the city, half a block south of Jasper Avenue on what is called 113th Street today. My mother didn't start school until 1911, the year Oliver School opened. Sometimes I feel I can remember those early days in Edmonton because my mother talked about them so often. She went to skating parties on McKernan Lake. It actually was a lake. She went to an event celebrating the opening of the McDonald Hotel. On Sunday mornings, she walked with her dad toward the river to watch the progress of the legislature and the high-level bridge being built. Her Sunday school teacher was Nellie McClung of the famous Five. And when she was older, she danced the night away at parties in Government House. I was born in 1930 at the Misericordia Hospital, just 2 blocks from my grandparents' house. When I was about to arrive, my mother walked to the hospital from her parents' house. Today, the Misericordia has facilities to care for geriatric patients. I sometimes wonder if it is waiting for me. My parents lived in Edmonton in the Oliver area, but when I was 2, they moved to Camrose. My father had been an electrical engineer working for the Calgary Power Company. As the Depression deepened, they gave him a choice. He could continue to work for them, but as a lineman, or he could be laid off. He had a wife and a young family to support, so he chose to become a lineman in the Kamra's office. Because I was born in 1930, my dad used to tease me and say that I had started the Depression. Our family made many trips to Edmonton, and as a small child, I was fascinated by the sounds of the city, the clop-clop of the horse-drawn milk wagons on the paved lane behind my grandparents' house. In Camrose, there were no paved roads. The clang-clang of the streetcars going past on Jasper Avenue. I remember lying on the grass in the backyard of my grandparents' house, probably in 1939, and watching biplanes circling in the sky. Later, I realized that these were flown by Air Force trainees who would soon be sent to England to fight in World War II. The interior of homes had an odd odor from natural gas. Residents of the city had had their homes heated with natural gas since 1924. Most of the towns and villages in the province relied on coal for heating. In cold weather, coal furnaces had to be given regular shovels of coal. Usually the fire was allowed to die down at night. Someone had to get up and add coal about 5 in the morning so that the house would be warm when the family got up. Because of the gas, a sign on the highway entrance to Edmonton proclaimed, "Look up, the cleanest skies in the world." It was so exciting to ride the streetcar all the way to 99th Street. My grandfather's studio had moved to the 2nd floor of the Shasta building above the Shasta Cafe. Today, the Telus building occupies that site. The horse-drawn milk wagons persisted until into 1950. When one traveled across the high-level bridge, cars were forced to follow it at a snail's pace, and the traffic would back up north almost as far as Jasper Avenue, or south past the Garneau Theatre on 109th Street. We always drove into Edmonton on Highway 2. There really weren't any viable alternatives. It was a 2-lane gravel road until 1949. In the summer, the Sweetgrass and Lazy Susans crowded the edge of the road. When you drove into Edmonton at night, the north side of the river was a brilliant ribbon of light. Strathcona's lights were much dimmer. Coming into the city, We would pass Mount Pleasant Cemetery, well south of the city. The area known as Mill Woods was farmland. From a few miles outside the city, you could see the giant milk bottle, which was on the roof of the Edmonton Dairy Building on 109th Street, half a block north of Jasper Avenue. The milk bottle was 26 feet tall and a feature of the city until the 1970s. You can still see the milk bottle as it is now stored at Northlands. Highway 2 was mostly paved by 1948. The stretch through Ellerslie remained gravel. The province had required that the cost of the sections of the highway that ran through urban areas was the responsibility of the municipality concerned. The town council of Ellerslie wanted the province to pay for the highway and refused to back down. The Ellerslie stretch was not paved until after 1955, when the government changed its policy. As the highway was enlarged, it was rerouted away from small towns like Ellerslie. Making the highway into a divided four-lane corridor started sometime in the 70s. Before that, there were deaths at the end of most holiday weekends from cars trying to pass unsafely. I started university in 1949. The population of Edmonton had grown to 149,000. The student body numbered about 3,000. Only 2 students at the University of Alberta owned cars. A new feature of the city at that time was the drive-in theater. The first one was located where Southgate is now. The first drive-in movie I saw was Walt Disney's Fantasia. My boyfriend, who loved music, wanted to see it but did not have a car. We took the streetcar to somewhere close to the gate, paid admission, and sat on the ground by a speaker to watch the movie. The second theater was located south of 102 Avenue on 142nd Street. 142nd Street at that time was pretty well the edge of the city. Drive-ins were a great boon to theater goers. Families could avoid babysitting fees by taking their children with them, and couples had privacy in the security of their cars. 149th Street was the eastern edge of the town of Jasper Place. It was a separate municipality and lacked many of the amenities of the city, like running water and sewers. Houses had cisterns in their basements, and water was trucked to fill and refill them. One could park anywhere in downtown Edmonton. The city was replacing the streetcars with buses, but the streetcars still ran over the top of the high-level bridge until 1951. In 1950, the main shopping area was downtown along Jasper Avenue. There were only 2 public libraries. The main library was a 1-story building facing the river, and the Strathcona branch was on 104th Street, just off White Avenue. There were no libraries and schools. The Canadian Club was situated beside the main library and was a men's-only organization. There was no place within the city limits where men and women could legally drink together if no meal was being served. The age at which one could start to drink alcohol was 21. It remained 21 until 1972, when it was lowered to 18 to encourage young people to drink rather than smoke marijuana. Ballrooms had tables with a hidden shelf where dancers could stash a bottle so that they could drink surreptitiously. These laws persisted until Peter Lougheed was elected premier in 1971. My father, an electrical engineer, worked for the Calgary Power Company. As the Depression deepened, he had been given a choice. He could be downgraded and work as a lineman, or he could be laid off. Since he was a young married man with 2 small children, the option with the salary attached. The company sent him to Kamra, a small town of about 2,300 people, and yet the hub of all the surrounding towns and villages. As a lineman, my father was called out to repair power lines in the most inclement weather. His responsibilities included all the small towns in a wide range around Kamra. The company required him to drive his own car without recompense. Finally, in about 1950, they bought a truck for company use. He worked for the Calgary Power until he retired. He never worked as an engineer again. My earliest memory is of the day my family arrived in Kamra. It was a bright summer day in 1932 when we arrived at the house my parents had rented on College Street, now named 48th Street. I was 2 years old. I remember sitting on a potty on the front porch of our new house, and I sat there watching the moving men take our furniture into the house, swearing loudly at the weight of our heavy refrigerator. Kamra in those days had no paved roads. The main street and the highway were gravel. The other streets and the back lanes were dirt or clay. The sidewalks were made of wood planks. I remember lying in bed and hearing the click-click of the female college students' heels as they hurried back to the Lutheran College dorm. They had a very strict curfew. I think they had to be in by 8 p.m. Cars sometimes became stuck in the lanes. Milk was delivered by horse-drawn wagon, and groceries were delivered by horse-drawn dray. We children used to chase the grocery dray, jump on it, and ride around for a few blocks, and then jump off. The driver didn't seem to mind. Men often knocked on our door and asked for some work in return for something to eat. Along the railways near the towns, out-of-work men camped in small groups. Some wandered along the rails for 8 or 10 years. Their families had no idea where they were or even if they were alive. In school, half pints of milk were distributed to children whose fathers were out of work. Often it was chocolate milk. I was so jealous. Although my mother made us each drink a quart of milk a day, we never had chocolate milk, and it was never in those cute little bottles. Around the north corner of our street, facing the highway, was the bakery where my mother bought most of our bread. It was operated by a widow named Nana McKinnon. When her husband died, she was left without any means to support herself. A kind person offered her his garage to convert into a bakery. The premises became a very nice bakery. Her bread was considered to be the most delicious in town. Over time, she added a range of tin groceries and a counter full of penny candies and other items. She had the first donut machine in town. Kamra had, and still has, an artificial lake created by damming up a creek. Below the dam, the creek exited through a valley which provided hills for the children to ski and sled on, and a spot for swimming and rafting in the summer. We also, on occasion, swam and rafted in the lake. That came to an end when someone reported us. It was, after all, the town water supply. My father was sent to correct the situation and found that it was his own children who were polluting the water. In the winter, the lake was a source of ice blocks cut for use in the summer. In the early days, the lake was always referred to as the dam. Sometimes in the 60s or 70s, it was renamed Mirror Lake, and the town purchased a pair of swans and landscaped the shore. The town is bisected by Highway 13. In the early days, the highway entered the town for a few blocks and then made a sharp turn so that it was routed down through the downtown area. Later, it was straightened out, and the highway no longer goes through the downtown. On the western edge of the town, a welcome to sign proclaimed that strong-armed Norsemen settled the area. In the 30s and 40s, the majority of the population were of Scandinavian origin. An annual feature in the town was the winter ski meet, where skiers from a wide area competed. Driving on Highway 13 toward Wetaskiwin, one usually saw Indigenous families traveling in horse-drawn wagons. In 1937, the Calgary Power moved us to McGrath, a small town south of Lethbridge. At that time, the population of McGrath was about 1,250, and the majority of the population were Latter-day Saints. The area had been settled by a Latter-day Saint group who had been bound for Salt Lake City, but broke off and came north instead. The town was graced by many very large trees, and irrigation ditches ran down all the streets between the sidewalks and the road. The day we arrived, my father parked in front of the house we were to occupy. Somehow he aligned the back door of the car adjacent to the black bridge that crossed the ditch. We children exited the car and raced across the bridge, all unknowing. My mother stepped out of the front of the car and stumbled into the ditch. We children loved the trees. They were so climbable. In the late summer, we took rejected watermelons up and played bombs away with them. We also loved the irrigation ditches. You could wade in them, you could catch salamanders, or when fighting someone, you could try to push them in. My father used to joke and say that when the LDS arrived in southern Alberta, first they planted trees, then they built houses. Most of my friends were LDS and went to religious lessons after school one or 2 days a week. Since I was left with no one to play with, I tried going to the religious lessons with them. At the first one, they served cocoa and chocolate cake, so I never wanted to miss one. One of my friends used to take me to her house to play. They were quite poor, and my mother said they ate mostly dandelion greens. My friend's father was always in bed, at least when I was there. He had been unable to get a job and spent his time listening to the radio. The radio broadcasts were from Germany, and my friend told me that her dad was listening to a very great man named Hitler. The richest man in town, I was told, was the bank janitor. He was arrested when the RCMP discovered that he had a still in the bank basement. After 2 years, the Calgary Power moved us back to Kamra's, and we moved into a different house on College Avenue. It was 1939, and the war was closing in on everyone's thoughts. I had had a rather severe accident and was forced to stay in bed for 3 months. While I was there, I used my father's typewriter to write endless stories about our soldiers winning battles. 2 years later, I and other Girl Guides were organized to go to an airdrop and pick up packages of leaflets promoting conscription and to deliver them to all the households in town. In school, we were taught how to aim .22 caliber rifles and how to recognize different kinds of airplanes, both ours and the enemy's. The normal school building where I had gone to school for grades 1 and 4 became the officers' quarters of a military training camp, and the rest of the base was constructed on the adjacent fairgrounds. Residents of Camrose became used to seeing trainloads of tanks, guns, and other equipment passing through the town. Trainloads of recruits arrived for the camp, and trainloads of soldiers departed, heading for Europe. Crying high school girls were there to wave goodbye to young men they had only known for a few weeks. During the 5 years of the war, the population of Camrose doubled to over 5,000.